few is probably a better word, available lexical databases for the Nguni languages. But these rely on adult corpora or adult texts. So, for example, Gustat and Putkoma's work in 2022 provide a morphologically annotated lexical database for all 4 Nguni languages. This makes it extremely valuable as a resource, but it is built from adult material. Mm-hmm. Similarly, Berghoff, so Robin, also developed a 4.8 million Xhosa corpus and produced measures like frequency and neighborhood density, but again, from adult text, so from gov domain websites, right? But children's reading input and the language that children are exposed to is very different to adult languages. So without child-specific corpora, we risk misrepresenting what children actually encounter in texts. So that then takes us to what available child-focused lexical databases there are in South Africa. So in 2018, Rees and Randera, as part of the Multino Literacy Institution, developed a Xhosa word list, 500 high-frequency words in Xhosa, which was mostly used for literacy resource development. But it is unclear what these norms were based off, and there's no word-specific information beyond just these are the 500 most frequent words. So strictly speaking, it wouldn't count as a lexical database. It's a list of high-frequency words. The real breakthrough came with Berghoff's work in 2024, so very recently, in which she built the first Xhosa corpus using children's literature. And this consisted of 321 stories, 125,000 tokens, of which there were 31,000 types. Okay, by tokens, we mean words, and by types, we mean unique words. Okay, so not counting for duplicate words in the corpus. From that, she provided child-appropriate lexical and sublexical measures for Xhosa. So why does that matter? Why do lexical and sublexical statistics matter? The reason I'm mentioning this is because we aim to use our database to also develop lexical and sublexical statistics for the 4 Nguni languages. Okay, so just to mention a few of them, psycholinguistic research is clear. Both lexical and sublexical variables or properties shape the way that we learn, process, and recognize words in languages. So the first is frequency. When we talk about frequency, we're talking about how common words are in the language. Okay, so your common words are your high frequency words. And frequency effects are universal. Higher frequency words are recognized, they're processed more quickly and accurately than your low frequency words. Word length is in the name, it refers to how long a word is, and that can either be measured in syllables or letters. Again, this effect is robust. Longer words tends to slow down decoding. And this effect has also been found in the agglutinative languages like Xhosa and Zulu, where words contain multiple morphemes. Neighborhood effects can be divided into neighborhood density and neighborhood frequency, which Paige will go into a little bit more. But basically, a neighbor is a word that is similarly spelt. So to give you a basic English example, a word like sat has orthographic neighbors, rat, mat, pat. Okay. And the effects of neighbors differs across languages. So it's very language specific. So in English, neighborhoods have been found to be facilitatory. So they aid recognition. So the more similarly spelled words there are, the faster words are recognized. However, research by myself and Paige found that in Xhosa, specifically in Xhosa spelling, neighbors actually presented a challenge to learners, developing readers. And finally, at the sublexical level, sublexical meaning the individual letter level, complex graphemes or consonant sequences tend to present developing readers with challenges. So by that, I mean things like the ch in Xhosa or the aspirated k. All right, so where to from here? As already mentioned, Robin developed the first isiXhosa corpus using children's literature that provided frequency and sublexical norms for Xhosa. And so this was the first major step. Our project, the Nguni Lexical Database Project, we haven't yet got a fancy name for it, builds directly on this foundation. So we expand beyond Xhosa to also include the other 3 Nguni languages, Zulu, Ndebele, and Siswati. We also are broadening our scope to include more children's literature. And so we're using widely available literature that children are exposed to at schools so that it reflects accurately what they encounter and what they read. The texts are or have been systemically cleaned, tokenized, and analyzed, although analysis is not yet done. And Paige is going to take us through that process in a little bit. We're going to then look at a number of outputs relating to those lexical and sublexical statistics. In short, Berghoff's study established the foundation for this work. Our project now scales this up, extending it across the 4 Nguni languages and building one of the first large-scale child-based databases for the Southern Bantu languages. What we hope from this is that this open access platform will be used to support psycholinguistic research, empirical research with developmentally appropriate stimuli, meaning it's graded or leveled, inform literacy and educational practice, and assessments, whether it be for research or for teachers to use, using what learners actually receive in their input. I am now going to hand over to Paige, who will take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we've established what it is we're doing here and the significance of this work. So I'm going to take you through the methods behind this project, starting with a look at our material, so the sources that we collected our texts from. So as Tracy mentioned, one of our goals, beyond just extending Berghoff's database to 3 other languages, was also to be able to include a broader range of sources. And it was important and necessary to us that these sources were, 1, accessible or available online in some format, and 2, that they were open access and free to use. Right. So there were 7 sources that we found that fit these criteria. Please do let us know if there are any more that you know of that we have left off of this list. So as you can see, the literature scene in Nguni children's languages seems to be dominated by the kind of African storybook initiative. So ASB is a South African-based initiative, but it contains books with a broad range of African languages, not just South African languages. So we specifically took books from their ASB approved collection, which are just the books that are more vetted by the initiative, and kind of edited and published so that they are nice and standard. You can see Ulwazi Lwetu was our other big source, and they are a Xenix Foundation project that was launched in 2023, I believe. So a great resource with a lot of graded or leveled readers. Sorry, yeah, not graded readers. So we specifically looked, of course, for sources that published children's stories. But in terms of the actual age target of these sources, this is more of an estimate. So for those readers that are graded, like your Bula Bulas and your DBE readers, those are graded at the foundation level. So your grades 1 to 3. So we're looking at around 6 to 9 years old as the target for those books. Those without grades are a little less specific about their age targets. They kind of just mention young children or young readers. But we expect around this age to around like 12, 13. Yeah. So you can see we were also interested in graded and leveled readers, because that's valuable information, but we didn't exclude sources if they didn't have that level of categorization, as you can see, because we wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So that's what we decided. Yeah. So the full database pulls from over 2,000 stories, which is quite an impressive number, I feel. That's obviously across all 4 languages. So by way of comparison, there were about 321 stories in Berghoff's Xhosa database. So a substantially bigger database that we are pulling from. Zulu, you can see, had the most number of books available. Here's our total for Zulu. And then it gets down for Ndebele. And I think that just kind of reflects, one, the kind of resources, obviously, that are available, where the focus is in developing these resources. But I think that reflects demand, right? Because there just are more Zulu speakers in South Africa. It's also worth noting at this point that this is not a strictly parallel database or corpora. So if we were to keep it strictly parallel, we would be limiting our number of stories. So we would only take those stories that were available in all 4 languages. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted it to be as lexically rich as possible. So it's not strictly parallel. So now is the time that I tell you about all the fancy footwork involved in putting this database together. And this is where our Python magician, Dr. Shibeshi, came in clutch. So I think it's just worth noting that I have condensed what is like months and months of work into basically 2 bullet points on the slide. So I just want to make special mention that this database would not exist without all the work that Zelalem has done and all the many iterations of processing that is still going on. So this is definitely an oversimplified explanation of all the work that went in. Also because I don't really understand it. So please save any technical questions for Zelalem at the end. Okay, but in a very oversimplified way, we use 2 basic methods to acquire our text for the corpus. One was by automating bulk downloads of PDF versions of the stories and using what's called an optimal character recognition, something like that. It basically takes image-based PDFs and converts them into text that the computer can read, and then we can analyze them. Just fancy words, yeah. Our other method was more direct web scraping. So, for example, your Nali Bali stories are all available just on the website. A lot of the sources were like that. You didn't have to download the PDFs. And we use multiple different APIs for that. Again, I'm sure Zelalem can answer questions. Okay. I want to briefly touch on our protocol for text scraping. We're going to get to the more exciting stuff now, I promise. But so we decided that we only wanted the actual story text in our database, right? So the actual body of the stories. Any other text we decided was not relevant for our purposes. And this included small things like just the author name, illustrator name, copyright info. But we also excluded any text related to the kind of activities that you find at the ends of children's stories. So you'll often get like comprehension questions or vocabulary lists and things like that. And the reason we made this decision was, one, to be consistent with what Berghoff did in her Xhosa database. And her reasoning was kind of, well, a lot of these activities are optional, right? So there's no guarantee that the children reading these stories are actually reading that text associated with activities. And even more importantly, a lot of the activities are actually directed at the teacher or at the parent of the child. So it'll be like, read the story with your child and ask them these questions, right? So it's not actually aimed at the learner, at the child. And so that's why we decided to exclude this particular kinds of text. Okay. But we did preserve key metadata for further analysis, such as the story title, language name, source name, and like I said, any level or graded information where that was available. Right. So here you can see an example of what that metadata looks like. Sorry, the download is a bit small. Don't know if I can zoom. So we have all our metadata, and that tracks back to each individual word that exists in the database. And this is something that I think is very valuable. It opens up a lot of avenues for research, right? And I think Tracy has mentioned a lot of them already. But you can see now how, for example, if we wanted to look for lexical and sublexical statistics that characterize different grades or different graded readers, different levels of texts, we could do that very easily with this kind of metadata, right? And then we could even compare different sources. How do graded readers look like in ASB? How do they look like in the DBE readers? Is there consistency there? Or are there some discrepancies? How can we better align future resources? So a lot of potential there for future research. So this project takes the corpus a step further beyond just being a collection of texts, as Tracy said, and we use lexical level tokenization. So tokenization, for those who don't know, just means splitting text into individual units, in our case, individual words, and sublexical units. That's not done yet. That's to follow. But yeah, after the cleaning process, we were left with around 150,000 tokens in Zulu, 140-ish in Xhosa, and around 100 in Swati and in Ndebele. Those were the total number of tokens, and I know you're not looking at millions and millions of words. We'll get into that in a little bit. Your unique words, we had ranging from like 37,000 in Zulu to 27,000 in Ndebele. And what we can do with that then is calculate what's called the type to token ratio. And this is actually a measure of lexical diversity. So are these words just appearing like in, I'm mixing up my measures. I'm thinking of contextual diversity, lexical diversity, right? Okay, so what that is, or how we calculate it, we take the unique words, the types, and we divide it by the total tokens, and that gives us that output, right? Now, those values represent a kind of low to moderate lexical diversity, which is actually expected. Okay, and I'll tell you why. If you think about what children's stories look like, you have a lot of repetition going on there, right? And that's, we literally had the same word earlier. It's strategic, right? It's intentional. Thank you. It's intentional to kind of scaffold the decoding and the reading process, right? You, especially for early grade readers, you want to have a lot of repetition in your stories. So that is expected. That's why we kind of see the total token count pushed up while the unique words count is pushed down a little bit. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just characteristic of the genre. Okay. Right. So we fine for time here. Since this presentation is more of an overview of our progress than a kind of review of a polished product, I thought it would be valuable just to take you through some of the concerns and challenges with tokenization and processing that we encountered and are still kind of working through. So some were just very small things, like making sure we maintain word level punctuation, right? Others were a bit more challenging, and this is where those multiple iterations of processing came in and are still happening. So unfortunately, child-friendly font or styles of font is not always computer-friendly, right? So a lot of the strings, the words were picked up incorrectly when we were text scraping, or they were tokenized incorrectly, as in the word boundaries weren't split appropriately. So Zalalem is using multiple different OCRs to figure this out. Then we have discovered, unfortunately, that there are some errors in the original books, some typographic errors. This is expected. Not expected in a DBE book though. So our resident Ndebele expert,
He's not
here, picked up that there's an incorrect word boundary here. This is meant to be 2 words and not 1 there. Right. So we haven't quite figured out a systematic way to deal with that yet. Any ideas? Oh, welcome. We'll figure that out. Then lastly, we were also adamant from the start that we wanted this database to be as clean as possible, right? So there's a lot of noise in any text, in any corpora, but especially in children's stories, okay? And so we were faced with some decisions on how do we get rid of or remove some of these noise, some of this noise. Now, linguists, don't get your hackles up yet, okay? We haven't, okay, let me just outline the challenge for you, right? The challenge was that we want to balance keeping this corpus clean for use as a pedagogical resource, right? But how do we do that without dictating what counts as a legitimate word in Nguni and specifically in this genre, right? So our approach, and you can disagree if you want, it's fine, was to be a bit more conservative. So to filter out obvious illicit tokens, and illicit tokens we counted as some of these things here. So onomatopoeic words, you end up with some odd things happening there, interjections, a lot of code, I guess you could call it code switching, and non-Nguni names. Those are some of the illicit tokens that we have separated out. So we haven't deleted any data. They are separated out. They are, the metadata there is preserved so that we can track back which stories they came from and also why we removed them. So anyone who wants to use it has this reference corpus for further linguistic analysis as well. And then we prioritize kind of under filtering rather than over filtering. Okay. Cool. I think I went through all of that. Fine. Yeah, you might be thinking, okay, well, why remove tokens that are characteristic of the genre? I was looking at markers, I know. That's this question. Especially like your onomatopoeic words and your interjections.
Yeah.
We do expect those to be there in children's stories. Right. But like I said, we feel quite strongly about making the corpus kind of as uncluttered as possible, maybe a little bit purist of us, right? But especially if you want educators and other literacy practitioners to use the data to inform Nguni resources. Okay. All right, we're nearing the end, don't worry. I'll briefly mention these because they were covered by Tracy earlier, but perhaps, so basically these are the lexical statistics so far that we are including in our database. I'll touch a bit on contextual diversity, was what I got confused with earlier, and the orthographic clustering coefficient. So contextual diversity just means how many stories does each token appear in, right? So is it just one word that's showing up in one story only? Or is it actually characteristic of across a range of stories? The clustering coefficient, this is a orthographic neighborhood statistic. If you remember, those are similarly spelt words. So it basically calculates a metric of how many of a word's orthographic neighbors are also orthographic neighbors of each other, right? And so if you think of how languages or words in language have these kind of interconnections in terms of how they all are orthographically related to each other. I think it's a pretty cool metric. I haven't looked into much empirical research on it, but that would be cool to test the effects of that on word level processing from a psycholinguistic perspective. So then in terms of sublexical statistics, these are still under construction. But we want to include sublexical frequencies at the syllable level, the individual letter level, and then at the grapheme level, looking specifically at strings of consonants, okay, and their frequencies. So the whole idea behind that is that we can then map these frequencies onto an existing inventory of graphemes and syllables in these languages, which is actually surprisingly difficult to find. So maybe that can inform this kind of documentation. Yeah, and then we also know that complex graphemes, like we said, affect kind of visual word processing and spelling. So researchers may want to control for such effects in their research stimuli. So it's useful. I also imagine that this kind of data could influence or inform something like phonics programs, right? So in order to introduce your letter sounds in a kind of systematic frequency-based approach, that might be particularly useful. And then we would in future like to add more morphological annotations, part of speech data, stuff like that. Okay, finally, it's a bit underwhelming now, but here is a sneak peek of some of these variables and what they currently look like, just on an Excel spreadsheet from the Ndebele subset of the database. Okay, I've zoomed in on the next slide pretty badly, but it's so it like carries on like that. It's the only way I could do it. Yeah, I think Zoom will have a better time by seeing this. But I'll talk you through some of these. So language and Ndebele. So I don't know, but we can see the length in letters, raw frequency, again, just how many times is it occurring across the corpus. Zip is a standardized measure of frequency. So I can't quite remember if you touched on this, but it basically takes into account corpus size because these this corpora is on the smaller side. That's a standardized or normalized measure of frequency per million words. Log transformed and some crazy maths involved. But anyway, then the rest of these are actually all neighborhood effect variables, which we need to sort through. But you can see we get orthographic N, which is just those neighbors that differ by one letter only. So we got locha and lata. Something like that, but yeah. Then I think this is actually one letter substitutions, deletions, and additions. So like langa, you can see there we got lange wanga, but then ilanga lang. So this one's like a broader definition of neighbors. Old 20 is the broadest definition. Unfortunately, we don't have an output for what those look like. And then your neighborhood frequency stuff, I won't go into for time's sake, but it's all there. Right. Okay, so just to end off for today, what are our next steps? Where do we envision this going? We are presenting at DASA at the end of the year, Digital Humanities Association of South Africa. Hopefully we'll have a paper coming out soon, or rather being submitted soon. But what is really more exciting is going to be setting up this database in some kind of usable open access format, right? We don't want this to just be a spreadsheet on what's that open access site? Open Science. Yeah, or GitHub or something. Like that's great. But or no shame, but yeah, we envision this database stored on a kind of a web page, right, in a kind of interactive, user-friendly interface where researchers, education practitioners, NGOs, anyone can go there and access this data and in like a kind of click and drag format. So they could download lists of words that meet certain criteria and then use that to inform their own research and to develop literacy and language resources. Yeah, thank you. Siyabonga is a cognate in our 3 Nguni languages, so that's why it's times 3.
All right, that was a wonderful presentation. We don't have too much time for questions, but one or two. Who would like to ask a question? Anyone? Okay, Clemens.
Okay, from the first page that you sent the presentation, you mentioned about cupola.
Yes.
I was about learning language. So on the first page.
First page.
Yes, second one, yeah. You said the lexical derived from corpora.
Corpora are just collections of texts.
Okay.
So you just collect as many texts as you can, and those are like just stored in a file. And then we process it further into words and their statistics. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes the database.
Yeah.
A lexical database.
Yeah, other questions? Okay, Cecil? Oh, is it someone? It's fine, you go.
No, you go. I'll go after you.
Right.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll confine myself. The practicalities of working with the tokens at word level.
Yes.
That really interests me. How do you handle, for example, things like variant spellings? Do you acknowledge variant spellings, or do you reference a standard word list, which is problematic
Yes.
in itself? Things like stemming words, the comparisons that you're making, they're basically they're a form of edit distance, really. I mean,
Yes.
it's substitutions, all that. Do you go sort of deeper than that to a more structural approach?
We definitely want to, but no, not at this stage. So this is really, we're in the beginning stages of putting this together, but we definitely want to go beyond that. I like your idea of accounting for variant spellings, and I think we've actually had a mother tongue speaker say that could be happening.
Yeah.
In the Indibele example he looked at. So that kind of analysis is still to come. But I think that's definitely possible based on what we have. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And is your programmer, sorry about the pronunciation, Zelalam?
Yes.
Is she here?
Zelalam is
He's
online.
online.
I think he might still be.
Let's just check.
Hi Zelalam, are you there to take a question?
Hi, I'm there. I'm here. Yeah.
No, he's not there.
There are a lot of
Oh, he is there.
tasks that you're approaching that are more of interest to the dictionary unit for
Yes.
South African English.
Yes.
That's where I'm from. So maybe if you'd like to talk further about your project.
Definitely.
translate it,
That would be awesome. Yeah, we can maybe make a meeting with Zelalam as well to bring him in. And, yeah. Okay.
Cecil?
Thanks, Tim. My question is mainly from a psycholinguistic perspective and just working with children with disorders like autism and attention deficits, hypochondriatic disorders. I'm just trying to think further if you can maybe develop like the neural basis and the neuroanatomical basis of language in children where this looks like neurotypical data.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we can expand the project to just look at the neural basis of autism and suppose it's clean data.
Do you mean in terms of language acquisition?
Yeah, perhaps language acquisition, language comprehension.
Okay.
Just to support, because the database is going to be open source.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Then people can sort of look at different structures and.
Well, that sounds brilliant. Yeah, that would be awesome to see those applications. Yes.
Okay, Mark quickly, and then I think we're out of time.
Question from Amanda online.
Yeah.
Not all the schools have access to the types of books that you're looking at. So Amanda's wondering, how representative do you think these frequencies norms are of what children actually read in the classroom?
That's a very, very good question. Yeah, and one that's quite difficult to answer, right? Maybe it's, then it's a matter of reframing it as an aspiration of what they should be exposed to. I don't know, Tracy, do you have a take
Yeah,
on that?
so maybe it's the framing or the way we put it. Maybe it's more to say that the database is built out of available children's literature in the Nguni languages, which would then include the African storybooks, and not necessarily what the children have access to in the classrooms. But what the database will allow us to do is to then compare the types of words that show up in the African storybooks to those that show up in the books that learners do have access to, right? So
and
like
the curricular,
the DBE books, the Vula Vula books, those that children do have access to, and whether that's reflective of the types of words used in the African storybooks.
yeah, but that's a very valid
point,
yeah.
Amanda. Thank you.
All right, I think it's past 1:05, which is when we're supposed to end. So let's give everyone on the team a round of applause. Okay, I know there are people with questions. Please feel free to engage. Please finish the chips and the cool drinks if you haven't yet. And yeah, thanks very much.